Story 1. She dug up my fancy flowers and replanted them in her own yard 15 feet away. Story 2. I had a neighbor who would sneak into my yard at night and roll up my sod. I would lay it perfectly the night before, but in the morning it was rolled up like it had come from the store. I finally got angry and spent the night lying by my back door with a baseball bat and a flashlight, ready to hit whoever it was. Sure enough, they came around 2 in the morning. I stood up, turned on the light, and was face to face with 4 raccoons rolling up the sod, looking for bugs. Story 3. I had a neighbor who would not let anyone use his driveway because he did not want it to get dirty, not even himself. He parked on the street. If he thought you were having a party, he would drag a bunch of plastic bags full of God knows what to the end of his driveway so no one could turn around. One time I came home and he was outside hosing the driveway down in the rain. To his credit, I have never seen a cleaner driveway. Story 4. He threatened to put giant signs across the wooded border between our properties if my other neighbor got into a border dispute with him. This happened after he stopped the excavator operator from finishing the grading so we could plant grass, and threatened the operator about crossing the property line, even though the operator was 50 feet away and not cutting any trees. He finished his rant and left without introducing himself. When he is not complaining to the police about my neighbor, he takes every legal step to annoy the police. Story 5. I used to live in a little town of 300 people where we had an elderly neighbor named Gladys. She would routinely check near our garbage can and take the recyclable bottles and cans we left for her. After we cleaned out a fish tank, we put the gravel and fake plants in a bag and left it on top of the garbage can because it was already full. About a week later, Gladys called from her yard and asked me to come over because she wanted to show me something. She had taken the bag and planted the fake plants along the side of her house. She said she was not very confident they would survive, but so far they seemed to be thriving. I could only nod and compliment her on her green thumb. Story 6. My neighbor sits in his yard, hides behind his plants, and meows at people who pass by. He is not dangerous, but he is not right in the head. His caretakers are his parents, and they seem to be very nice people. His father once told me, he just likes to be a cat, and left it at that. I did not ask any more questions. Story 7. She has repeatedly stuck nails in neighbors' tires at night. This has happened dozens of times to nearly everyone on the street, but she has slowed down since more people installed video cameras and motion sensor lights in their driveways. Story 8. He eats my flowers. In his defense, he told us he had been doing it for years when he introduced himself after we bought the house. He brought frozen cookies in a plastic bag as a housewarming gift, but said he was not sure what was in them. We share a side yard and he is a really good neighbor, an older, quiet man who keeps to himself. He comes into my yard and eats the lilies raw or brings scissors and clips the heads to boil and make jam. I thought his foraging was interesting and quirky, so I planted a few raspberry, blackberry, and blueberry bushes 3 years ago when we first moved in on the shared side yard. I told him to help himself to berries anytime, especially before the birds do. The bushes have gone wild and the entire side of my house is now a summer berry haven for us to share. Having a decent relationship with the neighbor I share a property line with is worth a few deadhead flowers. Story 9. We had one a while back that had a meth lab in the home. There were crazy fights and yelling at all hours of the night. The man would wander around the neighborhood, tweaked out and acting crazy. And once he threw a Molotov cocktail out of the second-floor window at another man who was smashing up his car, screaming, "I'll fucking kill you, motherfucker." Those were interesting times. Story 10. She pulled us over pretending to be a police officer, claiming we had broken the law while pulling out of our driveway and saying she would report it. She was not a police officer. I considered using my dashcam video to report her, but we had just moved in and I was not sure whether she might be dangerous enough to burn the house down or harm my dog. After talking with the other neighbors, it turned out she was just the wannabe president of a homeowners association in a neighborhood that did not have one. Mostly harmless, just very annoying. Story 11. He climbed my fence during the day while I was at work to use my backyard pool. When I confronted him, thanks to a neighbor who reported it, he claimed he had an agreement with the previous tenant that allowed him to use the pool whenever he wanted. I am not that tenant. I have several security cameras now, Story 12. Well, I used to have a neighbor who had a serious mental illness, although I do not know his actual diagnosis. His truck would not start one day, dead battery, and he told everyone on the street that another neighbor was stealing electricity. He said this because of the way the man parked his vehicle. He claimed it was sucking electricity from the ground to charge his battery and was draining the nearby car batteries. Many times he would run down the street and warn everyone to hide their valuables because Japan was invading the country. He was not using drugs, but he did take medication for his mental illness, and everyone on our street could tell when he stopped taking it. Whenever he started saying completely irrational things, we would remind him to take his medication, and he would thank us and go home, presumably to take it. He lived alone and was getting older, so I think he had a hard time remembering to take it. There were many more incidents. Edited to add, thanks for the rewards. I have never gotten any before this post. Story 13. He jumped in front of my car while I was driving down the road to yell at me for going through his trash at night. I told him it was probably raccoons. He refuses to believe it to this day. I cannot believe this comment blew up. Thank you all for the awards. Many of you are asking if I did it. I did not. Story 14. I used to live in a homeowners association. One board member lived across the street from my neighbor and me. He sent us a letter saying we all had to mow our lawns on the same day, at the same height, and in the same pattern to create uniformity in the neighborhood. My neighbor and I intentionally mowed on different days and in opposite patterns just to annoy him. Story 15. A man took my parents to court because he lost in our homeowners association chairman election. Some people just have too much free time. He demanded that we pay his legal fees after he lost in court, and he made that demand twice. Story 16. My neighbor stood in her driveway and yelled at me because acorns had fallen from a large oak tree on my property onto her driveway. She demanded that I make the tree stop dropping acorns, accusing it of intentional criminal activity. Story 17. I was dog sitting and was probably about 16 years old. My neighbor charged into the house while I was there with a gun, pointed it at my head, and while on the phone with the dog's owners claimed there was an intruder. Real life is not Call of Duty. I remember you, Daniel. Fuck you. Story 18. My sister's neighbor reported her to the police because her children were playing in her garden. It was not for the usual reasons, such as excessive noise. The neighbor claimed a volcano in Italy had erupted and the radiation would harm them. My sister lives in the United Kingdom. Story 19. Years ago in rural Arizona, we shared a pond with a neighbor some people called crazy. More sad than anything, he was in his 40s and lived with his mother. This was around 1988. A Vietnam veteran, he would walk to the shared pond with a .45 caliber pistol and a box of 50 rounds. He would unload on the pond while yelling, collect his spent shell casings, and walk quietly home. This happened every 90 days for about 3 years. Story 20. A woman lived next to us who required the police to be called on her at least once a week. She would scream at her roommate at all hours of the night, fall into drunken, sometimes drug-filled stupors, and shout at us while tripping in our backyard. I had to kick her out of our home more than once when she walked in unannounced, beer in hand. I called the police once because she was screaming about killing someone and rolling around on her front lawn. Another time I received a call at 1 in the morning, since I work third shift. My girlfriend informed me we had to evacuate the house because the neighbor's garage was on fire. It turned out either she or her roommate had started it while doing drugs or smoking in the garage. She eventually moved away but still came to our house to ask for our lawnmower. She was not happy when I told her to get off my porch. Story 21. I cared for an elderly woman for many years. She lived to the age of 93 in a crime-ridden inner-city neighborhood by being as tough and nasty as any criminal nearby. Her oddest actions involved her incorrect belief that she owned the road in front of her house. She did not even own a car, but she insisted that no one park there. She would confront them if they parked in front of her house. If they did it again, she slashed their tires in the middle of the night. She was never caught, but everyone knew it was her. She only stopped when she lost the physical strength to slash a tire in her mid-80s. Then she started using spray paint on the cars. He doesn't park in front of my house anymore. was all the justification she needed to damage her neighbor's cars. Story 22. This older woman lives across the street from me, and she is obsessed with leaves falling on her lawn. She will come out of her house and pick up an individual leaf from the grass in the fall or at other times. She spends hours a day outside with a leaf blower in the fall. She knocks on neighbors' doors if she thinks they have too many leaves on their lawns, and if they are not home, she will go into their yard and take care of them herself. What I find odd is that she is in her 70s, has no children or grandchildren living with her, and lives alone in a large 4-bedroom house with an in-ground pool in the backyard, complete with a slide and a diving board. No one has used that pool in at least 5 years, yet she opens it every summer. Somehow she likes my family. She has never once yelled at us about our leaves. She randomly brings things over like half-eaten gallons of ice cream and asks if we want them because she is not using them. I am not sure why she does this. Story 23. The old woman who lived below me left multiple cryptic letters blaming me for the birds chirping too loudly in the mornings. Not pet birds, the sparrows and other wild birds outside. This went on for months. Update. I'm flattered by the upvotes and awards. Thank you. To answer the most commonly asked question, yes, for a brief period I had a bird feeder. I took it down after a few months and multiple cryptic letters. Eventually management got involved and took her side, even though bird feeders were explicitly allowed by the lease. There were several trees nearby, including one that literally hung over both her balcony and mine. I assure you the birds existed before I set up the feeder and continued to exist after I removed it. My sister and brother-in-law took over the lease 4 years ago, and they still get the occasional note from Bird Lady. Apartment management even inspected their unit to verify there was no bird feeder or any other bird luring device. Update 2. I found one of the notes. Again, your bird droppings are on my railings, bird seeds on my porch and chairs, and your birds are ruining my night rest. Wee hours of the morning, birds in your feeder chirping. The bird feeder was gone at this point. Story 24. When I first moved in, my neighbor walked into the house unannounced. When my wife arrives home, she sometimes stays in her car to finish a phone conversation. He comes out and walks along the side of his house, checks his sprinkler controls, and looks at her. He has 2 huge bushes he refuses to trim. They block our view when we back out of the driveway. The fire department came by to clear trees and bushes around the fire hydrants. The neighbor came out and yelled at the firefighter, "This bush is older than you." Needless to say, I hope there are no house fires. Story 25. She stalks us. Every time I get home, she will stand outside, tell me I was 3 minutes later or 2 minutes earlier than usual, and ask why. One time a friend and her sister came to pick me up. The neighbor pressed her face and hands against the window to see who was coming. My friend and her sister were so terrified they called me and told me to hurry because a crazy woman was staring at them through the window. I replied that it was just the stalker neighbor. That was a funny day. Story 26. We bought a house, and the day we were unloading the first truckload, the neighbor came into our garage uninvited and started telling us which trees on our property he wanted us to cut down. Not the craziest thing, but the fucking audacity of some people. Story 27. I have a neighbor who is part of a spiritual organization called Brahma Kumaris. Whenever someone in the neighborhood experiences hardship, especially a death, she goes to their house and instead of offering condolences, urges them to join the organization and says things will improve. She ignores people the rest of the time, except when someone dies or a new family moves in. Then she visits, preaches, and gives them books by the organization's leaders. Story 28. He had severe anger issues and would yell at anyone he disliked in public. A few years ago, he was involved in a road rage incident. When he began banging on the other car windows, the occupants got out and beat him badly. During the incident, he had a heart attack. He now has barely enough mobility to walk to the mailbox and back and no longer yells. Story 29. He murdered an older neighbor, beating her to death with his bare hands in the middle of our townhome complex. Her daughter and granddaughter are my neighbors, and she was visiting them as she did every week. Detectives knocked on my door to ask if I knew anything about him or the incident. The only thing I knew was that he was always arguing with other neighbors. After the detectives left, I looked him up on Facebook and saw that he had posted a threat to kill her 30 minutes before he did it. He took pictures of her car and her daughter's house, posted them on Facebook with her address, and wrote, "I'm going to get the bitch." After the killing he posted, "Got the red-headed old bitch." It is crazy to me that at 5:30 in the evening, in broad daylight and just a few yards from my door, he killed her and no one saw it. The investigation is still ongoing. I am not sure why it is not first-degree murder. According to other neighbors, they had confrontations before. He is currently charged with second-degree murder with intent. The next court date is not until September. Story 30. My neighbor was an 85-year-old widow who lived alone. She had 2 vehicles, a car and a truck. Over the course of a few months, I realized she was no longer parking her car in her garage as she had for many years, and then suddenly the truck was not being parked in the garage either. It turned out she no longer had room in her garage because she was walking down to a residential construction site about a block away every evening and carrying home 2x4s. She had over 500 boards stacked in her garage. When asked what she planned to do with them, she did not have an answer. Bonus crazy neighbor stories. I drove 16 hours straight, pulled into my driveway, and collapsed on my couch immediately. I must have left the garage door open because I woke up to the neighbor shaking me to ask if she had missed the newspaper delivery that morning. She once believed I had not cleaned up after my dog in her front yard, even though I never owned a dog. She retaliated by walking around the neighborhood with a garbage bag, collecting dog waste, and dumping the bag on my front lawn while I watched from my front window. She once caused my water bill to increase by more than $300 in a month by hooking her sprinkler to my water supply when I left for work and letting it run all day until shortly before I returned. In the fall, she put up an orange snow fence between our yards to keep my leaves out of her yard, even after I pointed out that I only had pine trees. She would not remove the fence. I should have known something was off from day one. I closed on my house at 9 in the morning and had a roofing company waiting to start. We spent the day removing old roofing layers and carrying bundles onto the roof for the next day. That evening, exhausted and cooling off in the front yard, 6 of us watched as the neighbor walked across the sidewalk, entered my house without acknowledging us, and looked around. She hated dandelions. The first year I lived there, my lawn started dying in patches, as if someone had sprayed weed killer with a stream nozzle from a long distance. I later discovered she was doing that because I had a snowblower. I cleared her driveway in winter. She never thanked me in person. After I finished, she would leave a bag at my front door containing expired pantry items. I once received about a dozen cans of 10-year expired Chef Boyardee products and, on another occasion, half a bag of wheat flour. Story 31. The neighbor behind us had a leak in his water pipe. Rather than repair it, he had the sump pump drain the water into his backyard. So the back of our yard was damp all year. Eventually, the pipe burst and flooded the house with 5 feet of water. He kept the pump running, flooding the neighborhood. After about an hour, a group of neighbors whose yards were affected confronted him and called the city to shut off the water. The city repaired the pipe and he received a large fine. At least my yard is essentially dry now. I should also mention that he once rented the house to drug users, and it nearly burned down when the ex-girlfriend of one of them sneaked in and started a fire. Story 32. The adults in the family allow their small but surprisingly aggressive dog to roam unleashed and without a muzzle. We live right next to a very busy road and public sidewalk, and the dog often chases children and barks at other dogs, cars, and people. It is a mess, and the adults ignore any attempts at reasoning. Ironically, their children always keep the dog on a leash and apologize if he goes after anyone. Story 33. I've heard far more than I need to about their health ailments and bowel movements. One night, I was in the backyard sitting in lawn chairs watching the stars with my wife when she suddenly shone a flashlight in our faces. I lost it and shouted, "What the fucking hell are you doing?" She apologized and left without explanation. I could go on, but I might start thinking about moving again. Story 34. They called the police on people who were parked legally in front of their house, took pictures of my partner's dad while he was working in the yard, disappeared without a trace, and then came back home in the dead of night 8 months later. Weirdos. Story 35. Ours is a classic retired man with poor health and almost nothing going on in his life. He is not married and, as far as I know, has no children. He rarely has visitors. I think he once dreamed of being a police officer but never quite made it. So he has taken it upon himself to be the neighborhood police. He spies on everyone and makes it his business to know everything. My favorite encounter was finding him camping out in my front yard bushes early one morning, spying on neighbors a few doors down. He had a coffee mug, a notepad, and a blanket, sitting in my yard and making notes about people he thought were using drugs at home. When I asked him what he was doing, he did not seem to understand that it was inappropriate. He seems to like us, which is nice, I guess, but he creeps me out. Story 36. She called the Federal Bureau of Investigation and Crime Stoppers about me. Story 37. Our neighbor poisoned our dog once. I have a hedge in front of my house. When it is trimmed and a single leaf falls onto her driveway because of the wind, she gets angry. One time she let the leaves blow onto her driveway, then picked all of them up, put them in a bag, and hung it on my door, saying it belongs to us in an angry voice. In 2004, my mom participated in a television show in which a singer visited the participant's house and a professional chef prepared food for my mom and the singer. My mom constantly yelled at the camera crew and tried to hit their equipment with a broom. Story 38. My friend was married but lived completely separate from his wife. She visited occasionally, and he sometimes traveled to see her. When I was invited into his house, I discovered he was a hoarder of garage sale items. Dolls and doll heads scattered around, boxes of toys, and whatever else you can imagine. There was only a 2-foot wide path through the house. He also had an overgrown yard full of various plants. It looked kind of cool, but seeing an overgrown jungle after several years was concerning. He was a nice guy, we often shared a beer. He was my best neighborhood friend. Story 39. He took it upon himself to mow my lawn while I was at work. My mower had broken and I couldn't get it fixed until the next payday. He ran over a rock in my yard, damaged his mower, and asked me to pay to replace the blades. I didn't even ask him to mow my lawn. Story 40. We used to live next to a woman who held disco parties for her cats in her backyard at 2 a.m. Every few days. She would hang a disco ball, string party lights, and play loud music. It was odd, but the strangest part was her dancing around the disco ball as if performing a ritual. It is one of the strangest things I have ever witnessed. Story 41. He had 3 small trees in his front yard. One day lemons appeared on them. We were surprised at how quickly they seemed to have grown, but on closer inspection we realized they were artificial. Story 42. Before I moved out of my parents' place, the neighbor on the other side of the backyard fence was always doing crazy stuff. He would practice shooting his BB gun down his yard at the fence while my dad did yard work on the other side, in the middle of the yard, or simply minding his own business. My dad and I got absolutely pissed one time because the neighbor decided to practice with a .22 caliber rifle while my dad was outside with our German Shepherd. There were 2 occasions when the neighbor trapped skunks separately in a live animal trap, killed them himself, and then threw their bodies over the fence to stink up the yard and the neighborhood. He then tried to blame my parents. My dad cleaned up the messes, disposed of the skunk remains properly, and told the neighbors the truth before the neighbor could. It helped that our other neighbors already viewed him as the crazy neighbor. My dad also installed a camera system on the shed by the fence. The neighbor is dead now, reportedly of a heart attack, and his yard has become a huge mess and an eyesore because his widowed wife refuses to do anything about it. Story 43. A country boy moved to the city into the house next to mine. The landlord had done a terrible job with upkeep, so the backyard was covered in dead brush and overgrowth. He saw the problem and used the best solution he could think of. He set it all on fire the day after he moved in. Story 44. This guy is weird as hell. He plays virtual reality in a large bunny onesie, like the one the kid wears in A Christmas Story. I guess who do you? He plays with his window open so everyone can see him, and from what I can tell he plays exclusively military simulators and never breaks character. You can hear him yelling things like, "Contact, 30 clicks south by southwest," or "Down, Reloading, ready up. He will throw himself to the ground. The few times I've spoken to him or seen him in person, he's had bruises on his arms and face from hitting the ground. And that's only what I can see from his window. Other than that, at night you can hear the guy grinding, hammering, and drilling on something. I don't know, he's a weird dude. He says he works for the government as a contractor. He has expensive equipment and new vehicles all the time. He cannot carry on a conversation. He gets nervous and breaks away as soon as he can. He was home for a few weeks. He said he was between contracts, and I talked to him a bit while he was setting things outside. The items he was laying out included a well-used rucksack and everything from medical and survival camping gear to empty magazine pouches and a plate carrier for bullet-resistant plates. He said he was airing them out because he planned to go on a backpacking trip for a few weeks. The weirdest part is he leaves almost every night between 9 and 10 p.m. He probably goes to get junk food he keeps in his car occasionally, but every night, I like to think the guy is a secret agent and uses the virtual reality sessions as an excuse to explain bruises and cuts. Either way, I feel sort of safe. He's genuinely nice when he talks, in a I haven't spoken to another human being for years kind of way. You go, Secret Agent Bunny, saving the world one hop at a time. Story 45. My parents' next-door neighbor Nancy started with a no trespassing sign in the backyard facing our yard. She set up a motion-activated floodlight that pointed at the side of our house. She punctured our ball when it landed in her yard when we were children. She called the police on the neighbors because she claimed their dog barked constantly, even though they did not own a dog. She thinks my mother, who is the sweetest person you can meet, is a backstabbing traitor for warning the new neighbors not to let their kids play on Nancy's lawn. She verbally assaulted me for chasing deer out of our flower garden and so on. But the real psycho moment came with the trees. We have large trees along the property line, just barely on our side, and she began insisting the trees were going to fall and crush her house, demanding they be cut down. We consulted an arborist who said the trees did not pose a danger but could be trimmed to prevent any possibility of falling onto her yard. During the trimming, she stalked the property line and screamed if anyone stepped over it. While they were trimming, a single stick fell on her lawn and she threatened to call the police and demanded that everyone have their licenses up to date. The arborist tried to ignore her, but my mother insisted they check. The arborist sent someone to City Hall and renewed their license. 30 minutes later, a police officer came to investigate because Nancy had called. The arborists were very thankful my mother had insisted they check. Story 46. Oh, Jeanette, may she rest in peace. We rented a house from my mom's coworker. Our landlord grew up in the house and was renting it out. Across the street lived Jeanette, a woman in her 80s who had lived there most of her life and knew our landlord well. Because she knew him, she felt she could come into our house whenever she wanted. She watched us through her window and found every excuse to come by. I had never really locked my doors, but we started to. It did not stop her. If she knew we were home, she would ring the doorbell incessantly. Our blinds always had to be down and the living room lights off so she would not know we were home. We saw her peering out of her blinds regularly. One morning the doorbell was ringing. I hid in the bathroom to pretend I was not home. The doorbell stopped, but the doorknob kept rattling. She tried for 5 minutes to open our door. Probably would have been longer, but I gave up and let her in. Why did I not tell her to back off? I am a nice Midwestern girl. I can be confrontational if someone is mean, but she seemed lonely, a little crazy, but harmless. Some notable things she did or said. My husband was cooking when she came in and she called him a good little housewife. She told our neighbor he should not be dating his daughter. They were actually a 40-year-old couple and there was not a large age difference. My favorite was when she suddenly crouched and peered out the blinds in our living room and said, "Look at those fat people walking that skinny dog." After we started locking the doorknob rattling and the doorbell became consistent. My husband tells that story so well. She seemed like a character from a sitcom. We did not know people like that existed. She was eventually placed in a care home and passed away about a year later. Edit. My dad recognized the story and found my Reddit account. Hi, Dad. Story 47. Before I moved back into the house, Our tenant thought he saw our neighbor watching his daughters and decided to stab the neighbor. When we returned, both the sliding glass door and the front door were broken because the police forced their way in to reach the tenant. It was his second offense, so he is serving a life sentence. My neighbors probably thought the tenant was the dangerous one. Story 48. We have a neighbor we call the Screamer Lady because when her children were young, she would sit by her window and run outside to yell at anyone driving by if she thought they were going too fast, ranting about their safety even when the children might not have been home. She still watches the traffic and glares at motorcycles. Thankfully, her children are grown, so the yelling has stopped. Story 49. My neighbor yells out his window about killing the kids next door. The police show up. He takes medication for a few months and seems fine, but then he randomly starts yelling again. One time he threw a bucket of urine into the middle of the road while yelling that he wanted to have sexual relations with my dog. Story 50. We went outside one day and saw him pouring bleach on the patio. I asked him what he was doing. He said, "The bugs are back. You see them? With their little wings?" There were no bugs. I did not have the heart to tell him, so I said, "You must have better eyes than I do." He clearly has schizophrenia. Apparently he has had exterminators in 3 times this year. I keep thinking about the kind of person who just says, "Oh yes, I see them. That will be $750. Story 51. My house backs up to a resort. I am slowly accumulating junk cars near the property line. Eventually they will build a fence. Then I will get rid of all the junk. Bam, free fence. Story 52. I saw the neighbor across the street, a woman who appeared to be about 45 or 50 and had only been living there a few weeks, wander into her next-door neighbor's house while they were not home. She was wearing only a bra and about 5 minutes later walked out muttering to herself with nothing in her hands. She kept walking in circles in her driveway, muttering. She lived by herself and this was concerning, so I called emergency services. Police arrived and spoke with her. While they were there, the owners of the house arrived and I told them what had happened. They said nothing had been disturbed and they had never spoken to that woman before. Shortly after, an ambulance arrived and took the woman away. I never saw her again. About a month later, people came to remove her belongings. Story 53. One of my neighbors regularly tells anyone who will listen that the government is spying on her. She has distributed letters to everyone in the complex containing a deranged story full of conflicting claims. It gets really awkward when she starts yelling at tradespeople who are just there to do a job. I have to escort anyone working outside my unit because she will tear into them. She did it once to me when I was doing maintenance on my air conditioning unit, assuming I was one of the tradespeople hired by the government to install spy equipment. I think she might have been prescribed new medication, but she still gives me the side eye whenever she walks past. Story 54. I used to be the crazy neighbor. I was 23 and female at the time and lived alone in a basement unit in a not great part of town. My bedroom windows lined up with a busy street full of bars and heavy traffic. While smoking on my stoop, I often carried a knife or a baseball bat. I told my neighbors I had a live-in boyfriend even though I lived alone. Sometimes I would yell at my imaginary boyfriend inside my apartment when I heard people in the hallway, then storm out and tell my neighbors what a jerk he was so they would believe I did not live alone. Story 55. She called the police and township for anything, real or imagined, that she felt needed to stop. She complained that a woman down the street was illegally running a business in a residential zone. The woman was a foster parent, and the neighbor argued she was being paid by the government to take children, so that counted as a business. The family across the street has a special needs child, and a nurse comes by a few times a week. The nurse parked legally on the street. The neighbor called the police to ticket and tow the nurse's car for parking in front of her house, claiming those spots belonged to her property. I tended a bulb garden at the end of my property that a previous tenant had planted. I put kitchen scraps, plant material only, in a small compost pile next to it. The neighbor called the police, claiming I was leaving garbage in the yard and on her property. The officers came, saw a neat pile with about 10 potato skins and a few banana peels surrounded by bricks, and told me to have a good day. The neighbor insisted the property line was where she wanted it to be, extending through the bulb garden. She bought shrubs, dug up our yard, and tried to plant a hedgerow on her imagined property line. My landlord ripped them out that afternoon and hired a surveyor. The police told her not to plant anything until the issue was resolved. When the surveyors arrived, the neighbor ripped rebar from a surveyor's hands, insisted it was a plot to steal her property, and chased them off. The police returned to supervise and guard the surveying team. She behaved while the officers were present, then went and dug up our yard again to replant the shrubs. She sprayed herbicide through the bulb garden I was tending because she insisted it was on her property. She installed web cameras in each of her windows pointed at my house. She owned 2 Cadillacs, an Impala, and a pickup truck. She parked them on the street, spaced to block anyone from parking on the block, claiming those spaces were part of her property, despite having a private driveway she could have used. She was charged twice with harassing another neighbor, appeared in court twice, and was found guilty both times. She continued to insist there was a conspiracy against her to steal her property. She accused me of dealing drugs and of having cars pull in at all hours, neither of which was true, and called the police. She accused another neighbor of sleeping with her husband for money and tried to have her arrested for prostitution. Through all of this, the police and township repeatedly said there was nothing they could do. Story 56. I once dated a girl who lived across from Frank the Tank. Frank was a large man who did not like his wife much, so he would spend hours on his riding mower, essentially going over the same 130 square feet while sipping a Coors Light. He always wore shorts that may have fit at one point but now made his thighs look like biscuits popping out of a can. He never wore a shirt and jiggled noticeably. He also liked to watch the local young women run around. Story 57. My neighbor moved onto a plot of land that is not his, claiming it belongs to his family. He moved a lot of trash onto the land and came to my house demanding that my husband and I allow him to use our private road and utilities. We refused. We farm 20 acres surrounding the plot where he lives. Long story short, he began trying to sabotage our property and our farm workers. He posted videos to Facebook claiming our workers were harassing him. One day he brought 2 friends who attacked one of our farm workers, which resulted in one friend's death. The neighbor fled the scene and went to a neighboring state. Police summoned him to clean up his property within 30 days. He returned for one day. That day his trailer caught fire and burned down. He fled again until he was subpoenaed into court in connection with the death. For reference, the neighbor has a criminal record about 12 pages long, including burglary, sexual offenses against children, domestic abuse, stalking, and methamphetamine use. His friend who was killed also had a criminal record. It is sad he died because he was pulled into his friend's dangerous behavior. While his friend was dying on the ground, the neighbor filmed the scene on Facebook Live and made no attempt to help. Meanwhile, the farm worker was on the ground applying pressure to the wound and crying. Story 58. An elderly woman lived in the apartment above us. We both had balconies with wooden floors. After dinner we would sit on our balcony, and she did not like it, so she would hold a bottle of Windex to the gaps between the boards, spray us with the window cleaner, then quickly run inside and refuse to answer the door. Story 59. I rented the basement apartment of the neighborhood crazy woman. Her car was decorated with thousands of rocks she had glued all over it. The property was incredibly overgrown. She had 5 unlicensed dogs, 2 cats, turtles that lived in her bathtub, pigeons, chickens, a rooster, and more animals I cannot remember exactly. When I counted them, there were about 17 animals upstairs. She would regularly practice the saxophone while the dogs howled along with her. She did not have a job and spent every day on Craigslist picking things up for free. There was a room in the basement where she kept stuff 3 to 4 feet deep and completely packed. I remember a cardboard stand-up cutout of Captain Kirk and one of the Statue of Liberty sticking out of the hoard. I took a job as a door-to-door solicitor for a short time and was randomly assigned to my own neighborhood. When I introduced myself to the next-door neighbor and said which house I lived in, they were about ready to wring my neck. I told them, yeah, it probably sucks living next to her, but I actually live there, so no sympathy. Story 60. I used to live next to a man we called the Screaming Guy. It was a cheap apartment and hearing through the walls was easy, He would yell regularly, maybe at the phone or the television, and we could never figure out what it was. It always happened during the day, and we could not find any sporting events that matched the times. He was polite and soft-spoken when we interacted with him in person. He lived alone and had no pets that we knew of because the complex did not allow them and we never saw any. Gaming seems unlikely given his demographics. He was in his 50s during 2006 to 2008, outside the generation that commonly games into adulthood, though it is not impossible. Story 61. My neighbor in the flat upstairs likes to stand outside my open ground floor window at 6 in the morning and argue with her dog. She says things like that she knows the dog does not want to go home yet, but if it does not stop being a jerk, it will not get its sausage roll, or that she was not the one who wanted to go out, so what is its problem? It happens at least twice a week. Story 62. Anyone else ever suddenly realize the reason you do not have a crazy neighbor might be that you are the crazy neighbor? Edit. I have thoroughly enjoyed the stories from all of us crazy neighbors. Story 63. He murdered his wife and dumped her body in the woods. Her nearly skeletal remains were found over a year later. Because there was nothing beyond strong circumstantial evidence, he has so far gotten away with it. It has only been a couple of years. Not kidding. Story 64. Someone stuck a barbecue fork in my cat. Update. Wow, when did this blow up? Thanks for the awards. Update. There are too many comments for me to answer, so here you go. The cat is fully recovered. We couldn't call the police because no one saw it happen. It happened on the day they moved in. They are from a country where, according to my mother, cats are considered unimportant. Update. I guess they did it because they didn't want the cat in their house, but the cat was used to the old neighbor's home. Story 65. I may be that crazy neighbor. I have 300 houseplants. From the outside, it looks like a jungle. Story 66. Deals in fentanyl, throws his rubbish anywhere on the estate, including prescription drugs spilling from the packet, lets a horrible 12-year-old run around trying to smash up cars, play chicken, bully smaller children, and threatens to kill people who tell him to control the child. There are also some quirky alcoholics, but they are harmless. Story 67. I had a neighbor who would chase everyone off the 5 or 6 sections of sidewalk in front of her house. All the children used the road because she would be waiting at nearly all hours of the day and night. Story 68. Get drunk in the morning. Sing like a peacock, high on lysergic acid diethylamide, in the afternoon. Have a conversation with the other eccentric neighbor 3 houses down from her balcony in the evening. Then have a screaming contest on the phone after midnight. Story 69. She has 2 very large persimmon trees that produce a lot of fruit. She insists on selling each fruit for $2, but the neighbors scoff at the price and nobody buys any. The fruit falls to the ground and goes to waste year after year. She is in her mid-80s. Story 70. My previous neighbors were in their 80s. He used to dress up in what was ostensibly a hazardous material suit and spray pesticide on his lawn. She would stand behind him in her muumuu and slippers, holding the pail of pesticide. Story 71. I am a little late to comment, so I don't know if anyone will read this, but I have been waiting for a chance to talk about my former neighbor. He was our landlord and neighbor in a duplex we were renting. He was a hoarder and did a lot of strange things, like rummaging through our trash to retrieve garbage we had thrown away. This was in Los Angeles, and he would put out dozens of very small receptacles, cups, milk cartons, and pots, all over the yard whenever rain was forecast. He left small pieces of plastic trash around the fence to see if anyone would move them. Odd stuff. A set of shared stairs led off the back of the house. One day I went down the stairs and saw a piece of bread on them. I thought maybe it was for the birds. A couple of days later, it was a piece of toast. The next day, the toast was wrapped in a used napkin and propped against my door. To this day, it remains a mystery why he would think I wanted 5-day-old porch toast. Story 72. If the sun is up, he has to be making noise. Yet he becomes furious if anyone makes even the tiniest sound after the sun goes down. At 8 in the morning, he mows the grass. At 9 in the morning, he uses a loud leaf blower to remove every particle of grass from the sidewalks and driveway. At 10 in the morning, he uses a pressure washer to clean the sidewalks, driveway, the siding on his house, his boat, his cars, the dog, and anything else he can find. At 11 in the morning, he breaks for lunch but plays talk radio in his garage at maximum volume while he eats. At 12 noon, he fiddles with the engine on his motorcycle, revving it every 30 seconds to make sure it sounds right. At 1 in the afternoon, he gets into a screaming match with his wife on the front lawn. At 2 in the afternoon, he fiddles with the motorcycle again. At 3 in the afternoon, he brings out the table saw and randomly cuts lumber that he will never build anything with. At 4 in the afternoon, he uses a chainsaw to cut wood for his fire pit. At 5 in the afternoon, he has dinner with loud talk radio blasting in the background. At 6 in the evening, he pressure washes the sidewalks again. At 7 in the evening, he uses the weed eater to mercilessly trim even the slightest blade of grass that is too tall. At 8 in the evening, he uses the leaf blower again. At 9 in the evening, he has one last shouting match with his wife while talk radio plays until the sun goes down. At 9:05 in the evening, he loses his temper with a neighbor for coming home and parking a car too loudly after dark. This is a real thing he yelled about. Story 73. It is 2 a.m. and suddenly you hear a sound. You go to the window and look out, wondering who is making it at that ungodly hour. It is the neighbor mowing his lawn. The cycle repeats. On the right, a group of spoiled, wealthy fraternity members throw parties when the other neighbor is not mowing. Story 74. Explodes. Okay, I guess that requires some explanation. This is not so much crazy as it is dumb, but it sure seemed crazy to me. This happened back in the day around 2009. I had a neighbor back then who we will call Gary. Gary was a really sweet, middle-aged guy who had it rough in life but managed to keep his spirits up. He liked beer and barbecue, which made me like him immensely. He made extra money doing odd jobs around the neighborhood and even mowed my grass for cheap. He lived with his uncle, a cantankerous old man with a hook for a hand. The uncle supplemented his income by buying and selling random stuff, much of which he kept in the backyard. Very Sanford and Son. They even had an old-timey truck. Gary loved to smoke meat. He would slow smoke things in smokehouses he made himself out of random junk. People would bring him items and he would turn them into smokehouses. He made the neighborhood smell nice. One day I was off from work, hanging out at my house and playing video games. Suddenly there was a loud explosion that sounded like an artillery round. Pictures fell off my walls and my cats scattered and hid. Being an idiot, I ran out the back door toward the sound. My neighbor's house is right behind mine, across an alley, so I immediately saw the following. The awning on the back of the house was on fire. A 50-gallon drum in the backyard was on fire. A tarp held up by several poles for shade was on fire. Gary was on the ground, unconscious, being rolled by his uncle and a friend. He was also on fire. Someone was already calling emergency services, so I went to help. By the time I arrived, Gary was no longer on fire. One of his friends grabbed the hose and I grabbed a bucket. They had a dual spigot fixture, so I could fill the bucket while the other person used the hose. I was putting out the awning while the other person sprayed Gary to make sure he was extinguished and to cool his burns, which looked terrible. As I refilled the bucket, I saw the person with the hose spraying the tarp shade. He then turned toward the burning barrel, aimed the hose and pulled the trigger. I did the slow motion no thing. When the water hit the barrel, a mushroom cloud of fire and smoke shot up over the neighborhood. I was screaming about spraying water into burning liquid. I later asked his uncle what was in the barrel. He said, "Oh, a mix of kerosene and fuel oil." I told him that was 2 of the 3 ingredients in rudimentary liquid rocket fuel. The third ingredient makes it explode more slowly. Eventually the ambulance came and immediately left with Gary. He had 2nd and 3rd degree burns over much of his body. The bigger issue was the concussion from the explosion. He had countless small internal bleeds throughout his torso. He nearly died more than once and spent a few months in the hospital. His face was badly burned and he looked pretty horrible. He is fine now, though his appearance was severely affected, and he had to stop doing my lawn because sunlight now hurts him. The poor, sweet guy came by to apologize and to tell me his cousin would be doing my lawn. I was just glad he lived, and he wanted to make sure I was taken care of. And that is the story of my exploding neighbor. Edit. The reason the barrel exploded was that he tried to burn off the liquid by lighting some newspaper. When he approached, the fire ignited the fumes, and kaboom. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.